the next time the Constitution could be amended underneath it, under the way we do it right now would be almost 6 years from now, because we can't do it in next year's governor's race. It has to be done during a governor's race, and that would be 4 years after that.
Yeah, we'd have plenty of time.
Another potential issue when the legislature comes back into session is the governor's power to issue emergency executive orders to deal with things like the pandemic. There's some lawmakers who haven't been comfortable, not necessarily with what this governor's done, but the legislature doesn't really get involved in that. Would you support legislation that would put some limits on the time and other things about executive orders in terms of the kind of orders that the Governor Lee has had to issue during the pandemic?
Well, we had a joint committee. It was headed up on the Senate side by Speaker Pro Tem Farrell Hale from up in Sumner County. And I think their recommendations were very adequate, that the legislature does need to review the executive orders, but in cases of emergency, such as the pandemic, or we might have a very severe weather emergency across the state, I think it's really the governor should have the power to be able to change statutory law and also regulations. That's what we elected him for. He's the chief executive, and in case of emergency, he should be able to do it. And I think were a governor to go too far, then the legislature would be able to rein him in.
And there's a timing issue, because the legislature is only in session from January to, say, April or May. And the rest of the year, if you had one of these problems, then I guess whatever the governor do would have to stand unless the legislature was called back into special session.
And there is a procedure where we can call ourselves back into session. Normally, the chief executive, the governor, would call us into session, but the legislature does have the ability to do it without the chief executive.
There's been a lot of executive orders coming out of Washington the last few days, as we've had in previous administrations. There's at least one member of the legislature who wants to make sure those don't apply in Tennessee. Is that legal? Would you support being able to pass that kind of legislation so those would not apply in our state?
If it were to pass, I'm sure it would end up in court and be totally unenforceable. So I think I don't think it's something that we should engage in. It's just wasteful. We're wasting the taxpayers' money and also the taxpayers' time with things like that.
Another issue that's before the legislature that I know you have some concerns about is a bill that would basically require that any transgendered students have to play sports, particularly girls have to play that under the gender they were born in, which might be male. The governor wants to pass that bill because he thinks otherwise it's going to destroy girls' sports in Tennessee. How big a problem is this? Is this something we ought to do? Or are we going to get into trouble like North Carolina did about transgendered bathrooms a couple of years ago?
Well, the executive order that the president signed was actually to the different departments of state government to make sure that there was no discrimination on the basis of race or sex or sexual identity and some other things, and creed, I think. And, it's very difficult to define sexual identity. Does it mean what you actually say you are, or what you are in the process of becoming, or what you have become? If you do change your outward sexual appearance, and I think that there is a problem that it could destroy women's sports, where men could simply say that they were a woman and play sports. And there are some court cases regarding that that have been brought in states that by law forbid discrimination on the basis of sexual identity. and they've been brought by female athletes because it gives the male athletes an unfair advantage. So I would be very concerned about allowing a genetic male who had not at least undergone significant hormone replacement therapy, as well as had his sexual identity changed to play sports against female athletes.
Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally is our guest on Inside Politics. Back to continue our conversation with Lieutenant Governor after this break.